What the Bhagavad Gita is addressing is how a human being with such outstanding abilities, a human being, a species that is designed to conquer the world, to gain mastery over the world, has come to the state where the world is crushing us. And so, in chapter 2, verse 2, in fact, the very first time that Krishna speaks in the Gita, he says,
Shri Bhagavanuvacha Kutastvakashmalamidam Vishame samupasthitam Anaryajushthamasvargyam Akirtikaram Arjuna.
When Arjuna is shown signs of complete breakdown, Krishna's first words are, how could this have happened? And when he says this, who is he speaking to? He's speaking to you and me here in the year 2006. Because what baffles his understanding is, how can a person with such infinite potential be reduced to such a state? But if you look at it, the basic instinct of the mind of a human being is to submit to authority, to obey external authority. So when someone outside of you shows a little bit of strength, you tend to crumble. And this is what the world is doing. The world is constantly challenging us. And when the challenge comes before us, what we do is what Arjuna did. Succumb to it, cave in, give in to it. And so we end up as passive partners in life rather than being assertive. So what is it in you that is succumbing to the challenges of the world, and what is it in you that stands up to it is the question. What do you think succumbs? What do you think stands up? What succumbs? Mind. What is it in you that's able to call the bluff of the world? Intellect. But the problem is we're not functioning with the intellect, we're not using the intellect, we're not strengthening the intellect, we're not reinforcing the intellect, and therefore we become passive. Now, ironically, the criticism against the Indian culture, the criticism against Vedanta is that it makes you a passive victim. In fact, the truth is just the reverse. Real power, as defined in Vedanta, comes from a combination of goodness and intellect. Real power. So, wherever there is only goodness, you're not able to, you become vulnerable, you become gullible to external forces. So, anyone with a powerful intellect is able to play games with you and get the better of you. So, in the Mahabharata, the Pandavas represent good people, but passive. They're not using their intellect. And therefore, they get taken for a ride by the Kauravas, who are functioning on only intellect. They don't have goodness. So what happens? When you are functioning only with intellect, this intellect gets weakened by greed, by avarice, by viciousness. And your intellect gets clouded by all of these. Therefore, you take wrong decisions and end up with failure. So what happens is, if you are only good, in the immediate present, you get taken for a ride, you suffer. But in the long run, your goodness stands by you, as was the case with Yudhishthir. Yudhishthir was a good person among the Pandavas, and he reached the state of realization. But along the way, he went through a lot of suffering. This is the fate of a person who's good and does not use the intellect, meaning who's functioning on the goodness of the mind and is not bringing the intellect into play. On the other hand, you have people like the Kauravas who use their intellect, you see a lot of them now, who are able to, with the power of the intellect, get the better of the passive people, get the better of even the good people who are not using their intellect. And temporarily, in the present moment, they seem to be succeeding. But in the end, they meet with failure. So, what's the way out? The way out is cultivate a combination of both goodness and intellect. And this was Krishna. The world today is our boss. And you are the victim. So, what you need to analyze is, what is it that makes the world powerful? And why is it that you are so weak against the world? So then you come to the conclusion that actually it's not the world that is powerful, it's just that I have become weak. And when you become weak, relatively the world assumes power. So what is it that makes you weak? Desire, correct. Desire and attachment make you weak. Wherever you have a desire, you become dependent on the world, and when you're dependent on the world tends to bully you, gets the upper hand over you. But in the same scenario, if you stand up against it and say, no, I don't have a desire, even if you fake it in the beginning, it's okay. Just put on an act of not wanting anything from the world. Immediately you begin to feel a sense of power. You know, there are police officers, bureaucrats, who get transferred around by politicians if they don't suit them. So a police officer or a bureaucrat who is honest, who doesn't fall for the manipulations, you know what happens? He is feared by the bosses. Why does the fear come? Because the boss knows that there is nothing in his power with which he can control this person. And so is it with us and the world. So what you need to understand is, this desire is what weakens you. The desire is what threatens you. Desire for what you don't have and attachment for what you have. So both ways you're finished. So what's the way out? Number one, strengthen that intellect vis-a-vis the mind. Now what is happening is, all of us are strengthening the mind. We are encouraging the desires, we are pampering the desires, we're nourishing the desires. Right from birth to death, we seem to be on a mission of self-destruction because we're adding fuel to the fire of desire. Anybody, see, for centuries, the Indian culture is based on subduing of the mind, strengthening of the intellect. We are not saying, Vedanta does not say that you should not have emotions. Vedanta does not say that you should not play with the emotions. Emotions are an integral part of the human being and a very important aspect of the human being. But at all times, that emotion must be under the control, guidance, supervision of the intellect. And this culture of ours has ingrained this in our system. So, in ancient times, children were brought up, right from the time their education started, they were brought up on this diet of intellect and high values. Goodness plus intellect. And that's why, even till today, ours is the only civilization that has had an unbroken existence. All other cultures, all other civilizations came, prospered, and disappeared. So, what you need to understand is, what is it that is so strong? What is it about our culture, our tradition, that has withstood the test of time? It's just these two things: intellect and high values. So today there is this dire need to re-establish ourselves, re-fortify ourselves with these two. and it's not that difficult. All you need is a little bit of knowledge. All you need is a little bit of shift in our attitudes. All we need is expansion of our mind, as we saw yesterday, and before you know it, you're well on your way to control over yourself, your mind, and therefore free from the vagaries of the world. So this is the first step, and the next step is fix an ideal. This concept of yajna, fire worship. Fire worship is inherent in all cultures, in all religions, because fire is the ultimate purifier. And what is the purifier? That fire represents a higher ideal. Infuse your system with something beyond your selfish, self-centered interests, and you change. You change from an ordinary human being to an extraordinary person. It could be in the field of art, it could be in the field of music, it could be sport, it could be philosophy, it could be anything, business. If you really want to make a mark, if you really want to contribute, if you really want to excel, you've got to think beyond your selfish, self-centered interests and think in terms of giving. Think in terms of making a difference. The moment you think like that, it doesn't matter what you do. It's the thought that is so powerful that it completely changes your life and the lives of millions of other people. So this combination of goodness and intellect, today is the last day, and we need to go back with something that will sustain us for the rest of our lives. And it's just this. These two words are enough to get you on your way. So with this now, we enter the last few verses that we have to do. Verse 20.